Hey everyone, What's Bitten here. So this is a Tactica on formations, and I'm using formations as a catch-all term, but I'm talking about how you form models into a unit, and whether that's at the deployment stage or reforming during a game, and especially doing combat reforms. I've been really excited to do this one for a while because I think this is something that I think about a lot more than a lot of players do. Um, and my impression, based on comments on my videos, is that there are things that I do that people scratch their head at and they wonder, is that legal? Is it is it moral and ethical or whatever? So let me just start off by saying this. It seems to me that there's a tacit, a default way of doing things that some people think are the way they're supposed to be done, regardless of what it says in the rule book, and that is that you're supposed to put a number of models wide when you're forming a unit, such that they get a rank bonus, and no more and no less. So for 20 mil infantry, that's usually 5 wide. And again, it seems that there's this tacit expectation that therefore you should put them 5 wide. You shouldn't necessarily do more unless you're going to another explicit formation, being horde formation, and go 10 wide. And I just wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think that there's enough aspects of this game that are left to luck that I look for every way I can to have strategy and tactics play a part. And I think that the way you form your units is a tactical and should be a tactical decision. Now, I will also be the first to say that this Tactica is based on my understanding of rules as written, not rules as intended. It's important to me. I pride myself. I try not to be a rules lawyer. And look for strange ways of arguing things so that it frees you up to do something wonky. I don't like that at all. But it is important to me that people play rules as written, because when you play a wide variety of players, that's the only thing you're going by. It's the only way to know going into a game what rules to play by are the rules in the book. And so if particular groups have norms or rules of etiquette of things you should and shouldn't do, I'm also very cool with that. So I'm presenting things here based on my understanding of rules as written, and I would be the first to say that if your gaming group disagrees with any of them, then I think you shouldn't play them, and I think that's totally fine. So here are the rules I'm basing all this stuff on. Page 5, when it talks about forming units, it's very, very broad. It says it has to have one or more models in a rank, and it says a number of, so presumably one or more vertical lines or files. During a combat reform, it just says that the most common use is to turn the face of the enemy, but it can also be used to bring more models into the fight. It cannot be used to get a model out of base-to-base contact with the enemy. And there's a lot of room between those two extremes of doing it just for those two reasons they explicitly say, and then saying what it cannot do. And then in the errata, they addressed combat reform, saying that the unit may indeed change during the center of the unit may change during the combat reform, and that's important because normally during reforms you have to keep your center the same. So in combat reform situations, that limitation is taken away, and that's huge because that opens the door to a wide variety of things. So I sat down a couple days ago and I thought about this, and I came up with 15 things to consider when you're deciding how to form up a unit. And I won't say that I go down this checklist every time I make an army list, or every time the combat ends and you have a chance to reform. But I think these are things that do pop up that might seem important during the course of a game. So what I'm going to do during this Tactica is I'm just going to go through these 15 things. So sometimes it seems that what you want to do is you want to maximize the number of ranks. Now, being 10 ranks deep, as this unit is unnecessary. You can only get 3 credit for 3 ranks anyway. But if you want to make sure that you have more ranks than your opponent, then you might want to maximize ranks. Or if you're just hoping to stay in combat as long as possible, and you don't need 10 ranks right now, but 3 combats from now you might need as many ranks as possible. And so you don't want to commit to being in a wider formation, because as combats wear on, you'll get down below where you need to be. So I can appreciate why people want to maximize ranks. I think I would normally do it when the troops are bad, like men-at-arms. They're cheap, they're not very effective in combat, and their job is to stick around as long as possible. That's certainly a situation I would consider that. When you're playing with monstrous infantry, of course, that changes. Instead of being 5 wide, they only need to be 3 wide. And so very often you'll see people fielding their units of monstrous infantry 3 wide. I think that is often a mistake. I think there are reasons to do it. But another thing to consider is, instead of thinking about ranks, maybe I should be thinking about maximizing the number of attacks. Minotaurs, they do not benefit from having lots of ranks. If your opponent, if the difference between having 1 rank and 2 ranks makes a big difference, then that's something to consider. But for the most part, Minotaurs are going to win or lose based on how many wounds they do. And that's true with a lot of monstrous infantry, not necessarily all of them. But if you have units, regardless of what type they are, that they excel in combat, they kill a lot of stuff, then I think it's usually more important to try to maximize the number of attacks, not maximize the number of ranks you have. Now, what that means is, in terms of monstrous infantry going 4 wide, or maybe 5, or taking infantry instead of 5 wide and going 6 or 7 wide, that's just whatever. Then you have to determine that. What I see a lot of people doing is trying to balance it. So with 25 millimeter bases, such as Gore have, 4 of my bases will line up with 5 20 millimeter bases. So what people will do is, instead of going 5 wide, they'll go ahead and go 6 wide. That way, if they get in combat with 20 mil bases, they have an extra guy on either corner. And this picture, by the way, that's a weird optical illusion, because this makes it seem like the men-at-arms lined up with the right-hand guy, and actually they're just touching his corner. But what this is basically saying is, yeah, I want some ranks. I don't need to go horde formation or anything, but I want to get as many attacks as possible first. And if I go against a different type of unit that's 25 mil wide each, then yeah, I don't get the same benefit in terms of maximum number of attacks. But against something like this, that allows me 2 extra guys. If they have extra hand weapon, that's 4 extra attacks from the front rank and an extra 2 attacks from the second rank. And that can make a difference. I can tell you that I never noticed anybody doing this until really towards the end of 7th edition. Not that I played a lot before 7th, but during most of 7th, I never saw people doing this. It's again, everybody thought that you should just automatically go 5 wide. So anyway, number 4, I think one thing to think about when you're deciding your formation is, do I need to protect characters? And there's 2 ways to protect characters. You can actually do it by going wide, or you can do it by going narrow. When you go wide, let's say I'm trying to protect my battle standard bearer. He's the big obnoxious yellow standard on the right hand side. I might go wide because I just need to make sure that I'm wider than my opponent. Now, if I charge my opponent, I can keep my BSB completely out of combat. If my opponent charges me, hey, I can tell you that most people don't think about it, and they don't think about touching your BSB. And if they do, the most they can do is get corner to corner with them, because they have to maximize the number of models in combat. So there's relatively few attacks that can go on my battle standard bearer. One thing this picture does not represent well is, normally what I'll do in this case is I'll take my champion, who in this picture is front rank all the way at the left, and I'll put him right next to my battle standard bearer. That way, when we get in combat, my champion will issue a challenge, and often that'll make it so my battle standard bearer, nobody can attack him, or at least very few can. Or maybe 1 attack from the second rank or something. So that's one way to do it. Protect characters is to go wide. Another way to do it is to go narrow. Now, with monstrous infantry, 3 wide is how you get ranks anyway, but nevertheless, you see a lot of times people using 3 wide instead of 4 wide because they want to hide characters. In this case, I've got full command on the front rank, and then my Doom Bull is in the second rank. Now, my Doom Bull, I'm not worried about people attacking. I'm not worried about him dying. But sometimes I would still prefer for him to be in the second rank, because when we get into combat, now I can make way with him and I can put him wherever I want. So it could be that I may want to put him on the front right as we're facing this unit. Or maybe on the left. Maybe I want that option. So I can go 3 wide, put him in the second rank, and now I have options available when we get into combat. Whereas again, if I'm 4 wide, then he's automatically in the front rank, and when we get into combat, I can't move him until after the combat's over, and then maybe I could do a reform. Another way to protect characters is to take a unit that does not need ranks, in this case, let's say great swords, anybody who's stubborn, and just go 3 wide. And this is one where I really don't understand some of the rules of etiquette, where people think that because you normally get rank bonuses of 5 wide, that therefore you should feel obligated to go 5 wide. If my great swords, if I have few enough of them, then I'm not going to do a bunch of attacks anyway. So going wide doesn't help me get more attacks. It's not a big deal for me. And I don't need ranks to be steadfast, and I'm not going to negate your steadfast by having ranks. Then, yeah, why wouldn't I go fewer? In this case, if I have full command, I can go 3 wide. I can put my wizard in the 2nd rank, and now you can't attack him in combat, at least, probably until, for 1 round of combat until you kill my champion. And I think when you allow that, then you see more people that are willing to field small units of elite troops. Now, another thing that I consider with reforms is there are some ways you can get movement out of it that might be important. So I'm putting this picture the way I did because I feel it's an extreme example, but it's something to at least consider. I've had this happen before in a tournament. At the end of the game, you get bonus points if you're within 3 inches of an objective. So in this picture, let's say that monument of the Bretonian Knight is the objective. I need to get within 3 inches of it. My knights finally won battle, but now they're stuck. It's the end of the game. They're not in combat anymore, but what are they going to do? Well, I do a combat reform, go 1 wide, and my center has to stay the same, and I did that. And no model can move more than twice its movement value, which is 16 inches in this case, so that's easily done. It's easy enough to reform in a way where I can get within 3 inches of that objective. So, yeah, that's one that I think where some people, if they're not used to it, look at you funny. But rules as written, that's completely legal. Now, whether that complies with the etiquette of your group, that's a different story. Another way to get movement, I call this the Malorian move because I don't think I ever would have thought about it. And I know when 8th first came out, this is one of the first things that he started talking about. But basically, if you want to enter a building, you can move into it, but you cannot march into it. So men-at-arms with movement 4, they're about a ½ inch too far away to enter that building. But what Malorian pointed out was you could reform 3 wide instead of 5 wide, and to keep your center the same, that means your unit moves forward and backward. And when you go from 5 wide to 3 wide, pass the leadership test, then you're within 4 inches, you can just step into the building. This is very often against rules of etiquette, and where I play tournaments, we have kind of a tournament circuit, FAQ, and that issue was addressed, and it explicitly says you cannot do it. But I think it's important to know that it's possible, whether or not you want to do it. But if I had an opponent who wanted to do it and the rules didn't say he couldn't, I wouldn't make a fuss because it's rules as written that you can do that. Here's a way of, I know it sounds weird that I'm forming a steam tank a certain way, but he's a unit of 1, but nevertheless the way I place him is still kind of an issue of formation. This is one that people talk about a lot when you take a random movement model and you put it sideways so that when you pivot to move, it gains you an inch and a half. I almost always deploy my steam tank sideways, but I'm not doing it for movement because I don't care. I usually won't even go forward as much as I can because I'm not trying to zoom across the board. There are other reasons I'll show you later why I often deploy them sideways. But people do it often, especially Skaven players with their Hellpit Abomination or their Doom Wheel. When they're trying to get across the board as fast as possible, they just deploy them on the 12-inch line sideways. And again, it doesn't bother me a bit. I hear some people don't like that. Another factor to consider when deciding your formation is, do you want to minimize attacks against your unit? And this is where you get the Conga Line. This has got to be probably the most contentious issue I hear in formations. People just can't stand a Conga Line. I don't usually do it. I don't really have a need to do it with the armies I play. But I have zero problem with it if somebody does it against me. But basically, you're saying, look, I don't need ranks. This is a stubborn elite unit. I don't have many of them there, so I want to minimize the number of attacks that you're going to get against me. So I'm going to go 1 wide. You're going to kill a few. You're going to win, but I'm going to be stubborn and I should stick. And I think that's something to consider. Another way you can minimize attacks is if it's a ranged attack, let's say a cannon in this case. If I have my knights in lance formation, he might kill 3 knights. I might at least consider putting him 5 wide so he's only killing 2 knights instead of 3. Normally, quite honestly, I don't think it's worth worrying about. But if this is a big unit and I was 5 knights deep, I would at least think about it. But then you get so wide, it'd be kind of weird too. Now here's something that I think few people think about, and I think about it all the time. And this is using a combat reform to influence or determine the direction of flight. This presumes that both players understand the rule that when you flee, you don't flee directly away from the way you're facing, but you flee center to center. And that is not only rules as written, that's actually addressed in the FAQ. So in the picture on the left, we're going to flee not straight back, but slightly back and to the left. Picture on the right, we're going to flee back and to the right. That can be a big deal. So if the combat just ended and it's like it is on the left, I'm thinking next round of combat, these men-at-arms are going to break. They're not going to be steadfast. They're going to lose by a bunch. They're going to run. Where do I want them to run? And if the answer is I want them to run to my right, not my left, then I just do a combat reform. And you can't just slide them wherever you want to do, but in this case, they're basically taking the model on the front right rank, front right, the standard bearer, and I'm treating him as this is the person I am reforming around, and it basically they in essence they slide over like that. I think that's something after every round of combat. If you think you might win or lose, you should at least consider: is it important that I influence the direction we're going to be going? Now, using the exact same maneuver, another thing to consider is: does he have a character that he's trying to protect that I want to target? Now, I should say here that technically, by the picture, if you look at the front left, that's the champion. I could not have done this move because that would have pulled the champion out of combat. So, pretend the champion's not there because that would change things. But assuming this was good, then I could reform to the right like I have, so that at least I have a couple guys who can start allocating attacks towards his battle standard bearer. I don't know if I would want to do that explicitly, this exact situation, but you can use combat reforms if you want to move over to a character. And again, a lot of times I see people not thinking about that. I'm in combat, I've got a fragile level 2 caster who we get, let's say I charge my opponent and I'm keeping that caster out of combat, and the combat's done, he doesn't reform to move over to her so he could start allocating attacks. Yeah, I don't get that a bit. This is the standard reason why people reform in combat. This is what it explicitly says in the book its purpose is. So the men-at-arms charge the gore in the flank, and they stick, but both sides stick when combat's over, so then the gore are able to reform to face the men-at-arms. Nobody ever disagrees with this one. It seems like a very standard thing to do, and most people think about it. What I think fewer people think about, and this is one I've been given grief in the past for, and I cling to it that I'm justified in this. But if let's say we're in combat here, my demigryphs against Knights of the Realm, and some men-at-arms are looking to charge in. I'm not worried about the Knights of the Realm anymore. They're so weakened that they're not really much of a threat. I've got 2 models in combat with them. One's a standard bearer. Other than that, I don't have a musician or a champion or anything else. So what I can do is I can reform to where I still have 2 models in combat, but I'm facing the oncoming threat. And I think the reason why, well, I don't know why people find this so contentious, but the reason I stand by this so vehemently is that it doesn't make sense otherwise. If I'm in combat, if I'm a demigryph and I'm in combat with these Knights of the Realm and they're no longer a threat, but I'm about to get charged by something, that's why you reform. You reform to respond to the immediate threat, in this case that unit charging in. Now if those men-at-arms charge in, I'm getting a lot more attacks against them. I probably win that combat. So I mean, it seems like that's what a combat reform would be for. But a lot of times people, I think, don't necessarily think about offering their flank to an opponent if there's a reason to do so. Another thing that I do quite often is if I want to avoid a countercharge, I will reform it away to take away the line of sight of the unit that wants to charge me. So in this case, let's say the Bretonnian Knights are in combat with the Gore. Combat ends, it looks like that, and he's got this monster that wants to charge me in the flank. I'll just reform to get out of his line of sight. And I've had people make comments in my videos saying, hey, that's a cheesy move. And I'm thinking, why? Why is that cheesy? If nothing else, I brought more models into the fight. I just did it swinging left instead of doing it symmetrically. It's uh, I don't get it at all. And I think that's, again, a very viable reason for a combat reform is to avoid future threats. So I made a sacrifice if I lost a rank. I got the advantage if I get more attacks in combat, and I got a huge advantage in that I'm not going to get countercharged this turn anyway by that monster over there. Kind of similar to that, I will reform often to avoid a flank charge. So in the picture on the left, men-at-arms tied up in combat with a big old monster and it sticks, but now he's got a unit of gore that are about to charge them in the flank. Look at the lower right. That's a good reason to do a combat reform so that the unit can still charge you, but now it's going to be in the front. And they may still win that, but that is a much, much better situation for the men-at-arms. They're going to get a lot more attacks against the gore, and they'll get their 3 rank bonuses. Another reason to reform, and this takes just a little bit of planning ahead, but there are times when you need to realign your characters. So if this is what the situation looked like, and it was my turn and I got to choose the order of battle, I would do the Knight's Battle first. Because right now, those men-at-arms are tied up with a monster. They're going to be steadfast, but if they lose, they've got really low leadership and there's no reroll because the battle standard bearer is too far away. So I would do the BSB's battle first, and afterwards I would reform. I would put the BSB on the right-hand side. I would slide down one, and as long as I'm not taking models out of combat, which means I can't decrease the number of models fighting with the gore, and if there's any characters or command group models, I have to keep, if they were in fight, I have to keep them in the fight. But as long as I'm doing that, I can just reform like this, and now the men-at-arms have a reroll. Another reason to realign your characters. So let's say it looks like this. Combat ends, the knights are locked in with the gore, they're about to get charged in the flank by that monster. I do not want that monster targeting my battle standard bearer, and I don't love the idea of him hitting my troops, but I can't get out of his line of sight. Well, I can reform like this, and matter of fact, if I was smart, I would have put the battle standard bearer on second from the left so that he was still in combat but was just touching it. And I have my champion on the far right. So now if that monster charges in, that's fine. He's going to have a flank, he's going to have a charge, but he's only going to get 1 wound because he can't kill anything more than that champion. And so that's another reason why you might want to use reforms to realign your characters. If you know you're going to have to flee, in this situation, let's say the gore are going to charge my knights, and I can't fathom why I would flee, but let's say for whatever reason, he's got 3 characters in there that are going to tear my knights up. I've got to flee. Well, the way it is now, that lance formation is long enough that when I bounce through my men-at-arms, I may just go off the board. And especially if there's a building behind the men-at-arms or another unit. I mean, I've had this happen with these long formations. You just start bouncing and you go right off the board. Well, if you know you're going to want to flee, then just reform into a single rank. So when he charges you, you bounce through the men-at-arms, and you're right there. And lastly, I just don't know a better way to describe this other than saying unit synergies. The reason I first started deploying my steam tank sideways is because what I was doing on the left is I was putting my units 1 inch apart, because in the rulebook it says you can't put them any closer than that, so then I just would go by the default, put them 1 inch apart, and then I go to move my steam tank and realize I can't move them except straight ahead because there's no room to pivot. So I started to put my steam tank sideways so that one, unless your opponent's being really picky about the 1 inch rule, I can still pivot. And even if he is, just doing that, just often I would remember, and I would keep my units just a little farther away. So that's a minor example of it. I think what you see more often in this picture, that arrow is pointing to my general. I found this playing Beastman when I like to use a lot of horde formations, that hordes limit the number of units that you get the leadership and the reroll to. So in this instance, the general's leadership is probably making it to that first chariot, but the second chariot is out of the leadership bubble, and anything on the other side of that chariot is also out of the leadership bubble. So if I wanted a bunch of chariots up there, they're really vulnerable. Matter of fact, I would also, that second chariot might be getting a reroll from the BSB, but certainly anything after that wouldn't be. So I would have to ask myself, is it really important to have the horde formation now, or would it be more important to put them in maybe a 5-wide formation and then reform into horde later? And sometimes it was. So that's it. Those are all the things I could think of, but things that I consider when I'm first designing a formation, or especially after every round of combat, I ask myself, is there any reason why I should prefer a different formation that I'm in? And the rules give you a lot of leeway in doing that. So, and again, I think it's important to say that if there are things that I demonstrated that you think are, I mean, unethical is a strong word, but are against the rules of etiquette that people would frown on, I have no problem with Warhammer being a gentleman's game, and you should follow rules that are generally agreed upon. But a lot of the games I play are in tournament settings where there is no gaming group. I mean, everybody's there from different gaming areas. I mean, a lot of times different states, and I don't think it's fair to expect your opponents to understand the rules of etiquette of your gaming group. And in those situations, usually you do play rules as written. So I think the things I demonstrated, whether or not you want to use them is up to you, but whether you should expect to see them, I think you should. And I think it would be very questionable to challenge other people doing things that are perfectly legal just because they don't really conform with unspoken standards. So anyway, that's it. If you notice I was breaking any rules, anything, please let me know, and I will go back in and add annotations to make sure that it's accurate. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it.